We're going to have a little bit of time for some questions and conversation. I'd like to invite our speakers from today and also Dr. Bill Nelson, who Rich mentioned earlier, but just briefly, Bill Nelson is the current CEO of Rich Learning, and he is an ELCA pastor and former ELCA University president. Rich has gone into his biography a little bit earlier today, but he's also currently serving as the interim president of Cambridge Seminary. Is that Cambridge Episcopal Divinity School? Yes, he's also the chair of Rich's board. So I would like to invite Rich, David, Natalie, Bonnie, and Bill to take a seat. And if you have any questions, put those cards in the air and bring them to me, or I'll come around and grab them, and you can think about what your questions might be. So we're going to get started with a question. So this one, it says to Bonnie. I wonder what it is.
Oh boy.
So we'll lead with you, but then if others, any of the questions, if any of you want to pitch in, just pass the mic. So the question is, why was your program unsustainable? What do you do now?
I think my program was unsustainable largely because it was sustainable for the single adults, but not so much for families. They came, they partake of it, they expressed interest in it, but they didn't have the availability to come all the time, so that it needed to not be a separate program from what we were doing on Sunday morning, because they just didn't have the time to set aside. Some of the families had kids in youth group, junior highs one night, senior highs another night. They have a small group or a Bible study they're doing during the week. So just adding one more thing in addition to the rest of their programming that they had with their kids was just too much. It was sustainable from the perspective of programming in terms of what I could bring to the table. It just wasn't in terms of attendance. What I do now, it's moved into being more present, those elements in our worship services, whether it's for special events. We did a cross-gen New Year's Day service because that was a service that we don't normally celebrate New Year's Day, but it was on a Sunday. So we did things that were vivid-like in our worship service. So my goal is to move towards having services that engage the kids more than just having them present. We introduce elements into the service, like for instance, on the New Year's Day service, there was a responsive Post-it note that people filled out in response to something going on in the sermon, and then they put it on the door as they went out. We'll do things where people have an item that they bring forward and lay at the foot of the cross. No, it's just adding elements that are either involve movement or touch or interaction.
So a question that perhaps the two gentlemen on the end here, Bill and David, might be able to speak to, as well as the rest of you, but what can seminaries do to encourage cross-gen ministry? And I would add to that to equip leaders that are willing to experiment.
Well, I'll start out, but keep in mind I'm just an interim president of a seminary, Episcopal Divinity School, even though I'm a Lutheran up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Then I'll turn it over to the real president of a seminary. But quickly, just a couple of ideas that come to my mind. One is I think we can do a better job of actually training our seminarians to get out into cross-generational experiences. I have a great example from Episcopal Divinity School where one of our seminarians in her field experience actually is conducting every Sunday afternoon actually a program on a farm that's owned jointly. It's a nonprofit owned jointly by Episcopalians and Lutherans, by the way, out in California. And they brought together children and teenagers and adults, and from those two churches that were cooperating, as well as others who didn't attend any church. And they come and they work together on the farm, they worship together on the farm, and they study together on the farm. And so it's a great intergenerational experience. Another quick idea that I learned when I was a pastor, actually serving in southern Minnesota, where Luther Seminary, where he used to be, would offer a program to bring teenagers to the seminary one particular day. And my idea would be to bring families to the seminary. Why? Because some research has shown that if we're going to encourage more of our young people to actually think about going into to clerical work, becoming a pastor or a priest in the Episcopal Church, the time to get to them is in the second grade, third grade, fourth grade, and fifth grade. And if you start the whole family experiencing what seminary is like, lo and behold, they may keep that in their mind and keep aiming toward that. Finally, I know that a lot have struggled here with the issue of how do you really bring about change in your congregations. Let me tell you how. And seminaries can play a role in here. When I was at Luther Seminary, not that long ago, I had great learning under Craig Van Gelder, who offered a course in church organization. Many seminaries have only recently started to teach pastors and lay people who are going to serve in congregations about church organization and church leadership and how you bring about change. But I borrowed what I learned from Craig and implemented in 2 congregations I was serving, and that was how to do strategic visioning involving the whole congregation. And what we did is, instead of having a regular worship service, we worshiped in the fellowship hall just like this, with people all around the tables. And we began asking, what would you like this congregation to become? And we divided up in discussion groups, but we added intergenerational discussions with different people from different ages. Even the little kids, they had a chance to draw pictures what they wanted their church to become. The point was everybody in the congregation got engaged in discussing what they wanted their church to be, every single person. And by the end of about 6 months, when we put together the plan for the new strategic vision, it was 100% approved. And one of the children, I'll never forget, drew a picture of her mom saying, what I want is my mom to come to church. And we found a way to make that happen. Now I'll turn it over to the real expert.
Well, this is words from a president who knew he was an interim from the beginning, and one who only discovered partway through. I think one of the big flaws in seminary education, which has existed for a very long time and is still really challenging to overcome, is that we've been willing to split the academic and theoretical elements of an education from the practical elements and have privileged the former. I think seminaries can be places of cutting-edge research. I think they also can at times become bastions of the very best practices of the last generation. And I think if we are to have a future, we need to be far more deeply engaged in and with congregations, supporting but also learning from, because I think it's congregations that are going to where we're going to discover the new models for ministry. And so I'm hopeful about 2 things about this new seminary, and that others will move in similar directions. One is that it's far more integrated between classroom work and congregational experience, and that we will, over time, be making room for more and more of practitioner scholars, that teachers, persons who are engaged in ministry, and who are not only teaching as an adjunct from time to time, but are part of the faculty and can infect the faculty with what they're learning in practical settings. But we have far too long sort of imagined this is primarily an academic model in place, instead of taking as seriously the kind of cross-generational research and work that Rich and others are doing, and training you from the beginning, sending you out that way, instead of sending you out as academicians who then learn how to be a pastor through practice. And what we really need to stop doing is when someone like me or someone else makes this argument, then say, oh, they're dumbing down the curriculum, or it's not as academically rigorous. That's a false dichotomy. We need to really take seriously the health and vitality of our communities of faith and pull that to the center of seminary education. So I'm hoping we are making some steps toward that in this venture. I know others are working at it too, and I look forward to seeing what we do with your support and your good-natured pressure. Thanks.
All right, so the next question is, how does this cross-generational ministry model work with non-traditional families or children who may not be part of a family unit? So with that one, I want to actually give it introduced, well, Rich already introduced Sparky, but I want to kind of ask his thoughts on that first, and then maybe some of the practitioners or others to also chime in.
Talk about put on the spot. Repeat the question, please, even though you were right here.
Well, how would you engage children from non-traditional families or families that might not kind of fit the normal church code?
Okay. Probably the same exact way I treat them as traditional families, because I come from a non-traditional family as far as cultural. I'm actually Lutheranist or Baptist. So I was confirmed a Lutheran, but also went to Baptist church. One, you have to be quiet. One, you better not be quiet. But the thing I received from both of my culturally different families was love. That's the one thing I understood. Everything else was really confusing for a long time. But what resonated forever was the love I received. It took some discernment to figure out the differences in the methods that they were trying to give me and teach me love. I received the love, I just didn't quite understand it. So I guess the same thing would apply in any different scenario. And that's just really go with the Spirit, go with love, pray about it, and listen. Probably listen more than you're used to listening, because there's some things that are from a different perspective that you might not realize. But with us, what I've learned today about everybody's in the same platform, regardless of their age, that means we're all learners in that circle. So if we're there to learn, just like what's the Chinese proverb? When the student's ready, the teacher will appear, something like that. But anyway, so the setting's in place. It's just being aware, utilizing the age benefit of being more of a sage, but also at the same point, we don't understand a lot of the things these kids are talking about today because of the generational divide. Because of social media, they don't think the same way we think. But we can learn a lot. In a matter of seconds, they can scroll through 5 or 6 different emotions. In Facebook, for example, you can scroll from a joke, to a killing, or to a terrorist act or anything. You can scroll through a lot of things. So we're not used to that. We have more time to process in our lives. That's how we've been raised. So they're multitasking, which can be a detriment, but that's just the way they work. So I think if we just listen more and learn amongst each other in that cross-generational setting, we'll all learn. And I think that's the purpose, right? All of us to learn and to share what we know and focus on the direction of the goal, which is praise and worship, I guess.
Any other thoughts on that?
I just wanted to say that that was one of the reasons why I chose to not call what I was doing family ministry, because then you don't leave room for children who don't have a parent with them, or for a senior citizen who lives alone. So using different terminology, and family ministry has become sort of in children's ministry now the next level. Now they're all talking in Children's Ministry Magazine and in all the publications about family ministry, but that doesn't encompass it, where CrossGen actually does encompass everybody.
How many of you have ever heard of your church referred to in some way as a family? So most of us in this room likely have really positive associations with the word family. That said, if you walk into a congregation as a stranger, as a visitor, and it's a church that self-identifies as family, chances are you're going to experience, you're going to have an experience of crashing the family reunion. It's not going to necessarily feel like there's an easy way in to participating. And you could see that even at the congregations that I've served, even the congregation that I'm presently worshiping at. There's people who have been there for a really long time and they're very comfortable. And then there's newer people, and it seems like their job is to sort of move into the flow that's already been established. One of the things that I've recently been reading is about the development of urban economy. And with a friend of mine, we looked back at what's the origination point of that kind of work. And it's a woman named Jane Jacobs, and she wrote The Economy of Cities. And she divides up the way that cities are organized into three groups. There's the anonymous community, there's the marketplace community, and there's the intimate community. Most of our churches are organized as intimate communities. If you want to go to a mega church, that's probably going to be an anonymous community. The church needs to find a way to become a marketplace community in which people can come and work out healthy boundaries for themselves, meaning that you can have varying levels of intimacy and anonymity, yet recognize that you can trust and have a core message or proclamation of faith that you share with the other people in your community. And one of the things that I noticed when you execute a good and healthy cross-generational program is that it includes people who have marriages where there's two different denominations living in the same home, or maybe a child coming from a single parent home, or maybe where there's one faithful parent and one atheist parent or an agnostic parent, because it invites this sort of marketplace conversation where everybody is valued, everybody is trusted, and the conversation can emerge without boundary problems.
Thank you. And you touched on a number of other questions that intersected with that as well. Okay. So the next question here is, thank you. Oh, thank you. So, so many of our parents want to drop off their children for Sunday school and do not want to participate themselves. How do we convince them to take part in cross-gen opportunities with their children? You're in the middle, so you don't have to answer. Just hold the mic. So anyone that
Yeah, my sister-in-law, Amy Kippen, is one of the authors in the Red Book, and they have 76% of their dads in their church every week in their education worship time. 76%, three-fourths of the dads are there every week in church and doing highs and lows at night with their kids. How in the world? Because most of Christian education is run by faithful women, and the husband just figures, this isn't for me. If you begin with the end in sight and say, do you want a 16-year-old who will talk to you every night? Hello? If you want a 16-year-old, you don't start at 16. You make sure that every night in every home, the message is, my mommy always has time for me. My daddy always has time for me. If you have a mama, if you have a daddy, my grandma, there has to be somebody healthy who says, I'm going to make sure that this child doesn't go to bed depressed and worried and those sorts of things. If you say to the parents, what do you want the day the kid walks out of the house? Do you want a great relationship? I've done this with thousands of parents, and they almost all say the same thing. I want a kid who can talk to me. I want trust. I want to enjoy each other's. Well, that doesn't just happen. In fact, most of what happens in American society will deteriorate that conversation between the parent and the child. And so that whole practice makes perfect. No, perfect practice makes perfect. We don't let a night go by without feeding our child. How could you starve them spiritually? You don't let a night go by without having them brush their teeth and floss their teeth. No, this is going to be not just what we do. This is who we are. And if you don't have 5 minutes for your mama at the end of the night, I don't have 5 cents for your cell phone. If you don't have 5 minutes for your dad at the end of the night, I don't have 5 cents for your car insurance. Play the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rule. Why would I, an adult with a fully developed prefrontal cortex, hand a communication device to a kid who doesn't communicate with me? Not going to do it. You can buy your own. Why would I provide current? No. And so you have to be an adult. And you know what? You're going to get payback from your investment. We used to be in an agrarian economy. We went from there into an industrial economy. We went from there into an information economy. Today, I think we're in an attention economy. Spend time, pay attention. Yeah, it's currency. And you'll never make any more. You can always make more time or more money. You'll never make more time. And to say to the parent, why don't you invest a few minutes every night when they lie down and when they rise, and I guarantee you, you're going to have a different relationship with that kid when they turn 16 or 18 or 26 when they finally have their fully developed prefrontal cortex. Ask about their investment. What do you care about more than anything else in the world? I know you would take a bullet for this child. I know you'd jump in front of a truck for this child. They'll spell love, T-I-M-E. Make sure no night goes by without it. They might say, okay, I got time for that.
I can just add a little bit to that might be helpful. Let me ask you this question. How many of you in your congregations have more men in your congregation than women? That's what I thought. So the other part of this problem is not just parents dropping off their kids. More often you have a wife dropping off the kids and the husband's not anywhere to be seen. And so there's a lot of research that shows that's true in congregations generally in all denominations. So one of the things that I started in one of the congregations I served was I got together a group of women and we started a class on how to get your husbands to come to church. And it began to work because they strategized together, and that began to make some difference as well.
Thank you. So I think this will be the last question. I think it's a good one. I'm kind of merging a couple questions into this one. But how do you navigate the process of launching cross-generational ministry in a congregation in a healthy way? And some of the nuances of that are, how do I integrate a reluctant adult Bible class into intergenerational ministry? Or how long does it take to do it? Or how do you balance intergenerational activities with age-appropriate ones? Conflicts in there. So go ahead. I'm going to hand the microphone to Natalie now.
So, there we go. There's all sorts of nuts and bolts ways that I could answer this question, which I suspect is not going to be helpful right now, given that all of us are in such a wide variety of ministry contexts and settings. What I will say is something that I spoke to with a smaller group in conversation last night. How many of you are replacing the word education with faith formation? So part of my title now, I'm the canon for evangelism and faith formation. When you think about faith formation, it cannot just be a new, fancier word for education. It has to actually reference something that is in fact new. And what I think might be helpful for us to imagine when it comes to faith formation is to recognize that there is no finished Christian product. When I look at my baby Miriam standing in my husband's arms right there, and my daughter Grace back there, I don't know if they are going to remain in active Christian ministries throughout their entire lives. I have no idea. I have an idea, and my husband has an idea of what we want for them, and chances are they're going to do something either similar to it, variations on a theme, or something completely different. Yet it's still incumbent on my husband and I to do everything we can to have these kind of faith conversations in their homes, so that way, you know, even if Miriam decides to run off with the Mormons, you know, we know that she can do that and tell the story with some integrity. We know that she's not going to become a Zen Buddhist in college without actually understanding what Zen Buddhism is. And so understand that whatever you are creating in your home and in your church, there is never going to be an end product. Yes, the idea of every night, every home, the idea of every member in every church every week, that is a wonderful thing to think about. Yet what I think that we might need to focus a little bit more on is all of the smaller flashes of light as in the gospel kind of light, that we see in our classrooms, when we see in worship, when we see people having those kinds of conversations at home, those are not nothing. And when people are participating in something, a real something that looks and smells and acts and sounds like the gospel, chances are there's going to be another gentleman in your church who wants to participate in that. Chances are there's going to be another mom that maybe a year down the road hears about how the other kids in her child's classroom are really appreciating her presence, and she's going to bother to show up. So I know it's rather trite, but think about this as a marathon. This is the marathon of the gospel. It's not a sprint.
Thank you. Well, with that, is this on? Did I turn it back on? There we go. Took a second. With that, we're going. All right, to use this microphone. With that, we're going to prepare to close, but kind of springboarding off of that, Natalie. Rich referenced the book The Shallows, How the Internet is Changing Our Brains earlier, and I'm about halfway through it, which is as far as I get in most books anymore. But one of the really interesting things that I've learned, that we've learned in just the last few years about how the brain works, is that as water carves out a ravine to make it so that when the water flows, as Rich referenced, it flows faster and broader and wider, and it digs it deeper, and next thing you know, you have the Grand Canyon, as opposed to a tiny little trickle or a stream. This is the way that our brains work. Our brains have evolutionarily not changed in human history, but they are something called plastic, neurally plastic. And so from very quickly, even in one person's lifetime, we can change from being able to sit down and read a book by a fire for hours on end and lose ourselves in it, to not being able to read through a whole blog post without clicking on a hyperlink and checking Facebook, which is the shift that I've made in a lot of ways in my life and behaviors. Because our habits actually determine the structure of our brains, is what they've discovered through brain mapping, and Rich was referencing this earlier. But what this means is that what we assumed in the modern era, that we are rational beings who can make rational decisions and decide the way we're going to act and live and the type of people we're going to be, is actually the exact opposite of the truth. It's not what we think that determines what we do. It's what we do that determines how we think. And so that is a very postmodern, very powerful switch. But as David referenced the importance of practicing the violin or whatever it might be, our habits create our identity. And our habits are often grounded in tradition and things of that nature. So I just encourage you to take that with you as you leave, that kind of what we do determines who we are, and not the other way around. So if we would be willing to just close in prayer, we can continue the conversation, hopefully, for many days and months and years ahead. Let us pray. Holy Lord, you have gathered us together today. You have brought us here by your Holy Spirit, and we ask that you might scatter us forth from this place to sow the seeds of your work and your ministry in all of our various fields. And we know each day, Lord, that we work our fields of ministry in different ways with different people, but you shape the work that we do. And we may plant the seed, we may till the ground, we may wait and not see much growth at all, but it is you who provide the growth, Lord. It is you that direct all this important work. And so we pray that you might inspire us and open us up, open our hearts, unharden our hearts and those of the people we might work with or love in our congregations, that we might be open to what you are already calling us to do, to bring your presence and the power of your message to a hungry and yearning world. We pray all of this and all the things upon our hearts as we go forth this day in the name of your Holy Son. Amen.